sit down, relax. I don't want to go further forward. It's too far away. I want to get closer to you. I can't see you all. That's better. I'll pull this one. Okay. You need it? You need to see me. It's on them too. Right. Where's the light shining on them?
The options with the light.
Is the light in your eyes? Are you too shiny? Shiny.
So
You look like you have just. It's too bright in his eyes. Look. He doesn't need one. But I want to see you all, but get down a bit. Yeah, that's a bit better. That's better? Bit better? Better? Okay, fine. All right. Hang on, let me get some hot water. Do you drop? Speak a bit louder, darling. Here, take the microphone. Come here. Just a minute, what's that noise?
Bună dimineața și bine ați venit!
Oh, okay.
Se aude bine? Da. Bună dimineața și bine ați venit la învățăturile din această zi. Astăzi despre cultivarea conștiinței emoționale, iar mâine despre compasiunea curajoasă. Invitata noastră, venerabilă Robina s-a născut în Melbourne, Australia. Este călugăriță în tradiția tibetan-budistă Gelugpa. S-a călugărit în Dharamsala, India, în anul 1978. De atunci lucrează în cadrul organizației FPMP, Fundația pentru Păstrarea Tradiției Mahayana, înființată de Lama Thupten Yeshe și Lama Zopa Rinpoche, sub patronajul Sfinției sale Dalai Lama. La începutul anilor 70, venerabila Robina a fost activistă feministă și a lucrat pentru drepturile prizonierilor, apoi a lucrat ca director de editură la Wisdom Publications și ca editor a revistei Mandala. Din anul 2000 se dedică transmiterii învățăturilor budiste și dezvoltării proiectului Liberation Prison. Venerabila Robina revine după 2 ani la Cluj, timp în care, urmare a primei sale vizite, am reușit să deschidem în octombrie 2017 Centrul Budist White Mahakala. Să-i urăm bun venit, așadar, venerabilei Robina Curtin.
Okay, that's me. Everybody, happy to see you all. Okay, happy to be back in Cluj also. I suppose I should try and talk slowly, is that right? It might be very difficult. One time in Dharamsala there were a group of Israelis, and whenever I talked too fast they had like a big political banner. It said, "Go slow." We'll see. All right. So first I'll sing a little prayer that expresses two things. In Tibetan, it expresses two things. The first lines are for anybody in the room who already identifies as being a Buddhist, so it's kind of reminding ourselves of our reliance on the Buddha and his teachings. And then the second two lines, the Tibetans would say you're setting your motivation for this activity. We might say, what's our purpose? Stating our goal. So maybe we can, this is saying we're sitting here together this weekend or today, whatever, to listen to these Buddha's views about reality, the universe, the mind, happiness, suffering. To listen to it, the crucial thing is to listen to it as advice. I mean, you don't have to take the advice, we're the boss, not Buddha, but it is advice. So then, the advice for what? Two things. One is to help us develop what for the Buddha is our really extraordinary potential. So that on the one hand, for our sake, but also so that because we live in this crazy world together, so that we can be of use to others, we can be of benefit to others. So sort of making that our purpose, if you like, that underpins this weekend together. And I'll sing this little prayer that expresses that in Tibetan. Sangye charang soke choknam la jangchu barudak nikyap suchi dagi chunyen gipa sonam ki drola penche sangye drupasho. Sangye charang soke choknam la jangchu barudak nikyap suchi dagi chunyen gipa sonam ki drola penche sangye drupasho. Sangye charam soke chognamla, jangchu padu dagni kyapsuchi, dagi chonyen gi personam ki, drola penje sangye drupasho. Okay, so I notice around the world, because I'll go around to these different Buddhist centers, I notice that we really do all ask the same questions. It's kind of fascinating. But there's really one question I've only ever had once from anybody on the planet. And that was, in fact, it was a scientist in New Zealand, and he just happened to say, he said, who revealed the teachings to the Buddha? So it's a perfect question, but it's a perfect question if the philosophy you're talking about asserts a creator, which of course is the usual view we have about religion. You know, especially the major religions that we know about, especially in the coming from Asia, the Middle East and Europe. You know, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, they assert a creator, and that for us usually is the meaning of religion, that you believe in a creator. So that question, from that perspective, is perfect. So my answer shocked him. I said, would you ask Einstein, who revealed the teachings about relativity to him? Of course we wouldn't. And this was quite of a shocking answer. This is the answer. Because for the Buddha, he's not a creator. He doesn't assert, in fact, the entire Buddhist worldview, and in fact that's what it is, you know, it's stemming from these amazing Indians more than 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 years ago. Buddha came out of that tradition. But of course in our culture, you know, especially us Europeans, what do we know about India? Absolutely zero. We love the Greeks, you know. I don't know about Romania, but half the fancy words in English are in Greek. We think, you know, we go back to the Greeks. They're the great philosophers. They're the thinkers that we think about. But the Indians, we know nothing. Even many of us who are Western these days, I mean, many Western Buddhists, we know zero about the Indians who came before the Buddha. But it's very fascinating, this extraordinary system, you know, of these amazing thinkers, scholars, philosophers with this vast, fascinating worldview. So the Buddha, though, came out of that tradition, and then he diverged in his own direction. And the point is, he's not a creator. He doesn't assert a creator. He would argue philosophically with that view, you know. So if you have faith in a creator, I'm not trying to insult you, but the Buddha's view very clearly is that. So therefore, we have to, the logical question has to be, you know, then all this information, if it's not revelation, if it's not coming from on high, which is how we think of religion, then where does this information come from? Well, in exactly the same way, and initially this is a surprise to us, in exactly the same way we know that if I were Einstein, I'm presenting you with my findings. I know I didn't have a dream about it. You know I didn't have a vision. You know, you hope I didn't. And I'm just presenting you my vision. You know I'm not asking you to believe a single word I'm telling you. You know I'm not asking you to have faith in me. I'm presenting my findings. And then I'll say, here's my methodology, and if you want to find the same thing, if you want to accomplish the same thing, if you want to achieve the same thing, follow my steps, you know. And as the Dalai Lama said, often says to us modern people, and if you, as you do that, if you choose to follow Buddha's methodology, you know, that's what a Buddhist is, taking Buddhism as your working hypothesis, this is always what I say. I never say I believe in Buddhism, I believe in karma, I believe in reincarnation. For me, that's just intellectual laziness, you know. Again, you wouldn't say that about relativity. Oh, I believe in relativity, I believe in botany, I believe in mathematics. We don't say that. We listen to it, we learn it, we internalize it, and so we experience the validity of it. But as the Dalai Lama says, if you are, you know, following Buddha's steps, and you get to a certain point from your own internalizing process, your own practice, that you discover he is wrong in what he asserts, then of course you must reject him, just like you would Einstein. So in other words, it is a surprise to us, because I'm a Buddhist nun, right? I just sang a prayer. It sounds like religion, yeah? So this view seems to be quite contradictory. And we can see in our culture, coming since the time of the Jews and the Christians, it was then all the world was only religious. Certainly in the earlier days in Christianity, those Christians owned the world. Philosophy equaled Christianity, and then people like, what's his name? That one, those famous scientists. What's that one? Anyway, those guys back then started questioning the teachings of the Catholic Church, questioning the assumptions, and then now we've got these two separate worlds of religion over here and science and serious knowledge over here. But the Buddhist approach is kind of a combination of both. And that's why, as I said, the idea here is to listen. If you haven't heard before, with an open mind, listen. You'll hear things that sound ridiculous if we compare them with the philosophical materialist view, but these are the Buddhist views, you know. So, okay, what's the point of this? Why would I want to listen to Buddhist teachings? Why would I want to be a Buddhist, you know? Well, in a sense, the answer to that is implied in the word itself, the word Buddha, or especially the Tibetan equivalent, Sangye. So the etymology, the etymology of this is very delicious, very tasty. Sang, Buddha, Sangye, Sang implies the total eradication from one's own mind of all neuroses, all ego, all fears, all neuroses, all jealousy, all depression, all anger, all the nonsense that, as far as we are concerned, both in our neuroscience, in our own cells, and in our psychological models, that we consider completely normal parts of a normal person. In fact, so normal, you'd be considered mentally ill if you didn't have any anger, any ego, any fears, any jealousy. We so internalize that as part of our model of who a normal human being is. But that's the Buddha's own finding. That's the Buddha's view. We're going to look into that. Then the second syllable, Gye, Buddha, implies the development to perfection of all the other stuff in our mind. The first lot we know. We know fears, dramas, ego, depression, jealousy, anxiety. We're utterly familiar with this. And the other stuff we're also familiar. Intelligence, clarity, wisdom, love, compassion, joy. These words we know. This is the stuff. As simplistic in a sense as it sounds, this is the stuff of Buddhist psychology. So like I said, you know, the Buddha came out of this amazing tradition. These Indians, extraordinary kind of massive literature, and it is a worldview. There are many variations of it. And as the Dalai Lama said a couple of years ago, I remember it really struck me. It was these amazing Indians more than 3,000 years ago who were the ones who began the investigation into the nature of self. Well, you know, we probably thought it was Freud, from what we know, you know. So it's quite shocking. 3,000 years ago, these views. And then Buddha diverged in his own direction, specifically in relation to his own experiential findings about the nature of self. So, okay, so if then this word Buddha, Sangye, implies that we can get rid of all the rubbish and grow all the goodness, speaking very simply, then so what part of us, in what part of us does that stuff exist? Well, no, we call it the mind. So first, if that's the case, if Buddha's asserting that that's what we're aiming to do long term, which already implies that you're not, you know, that we can change our minds, and that's the essence of really what Buddha's saying, then if this is true, and if we want to try out the Buddhist methods, we need to know what he means by the mind. And it's, in many senses, radically different. There are many radically different assumptions in Buddhism. So I'll just state them for what it's worth. And then we'll go into detail about the mind and how to cultivate emotional awareness and compassion. There's a nice analogy, a lovely analogy in Buddhism. And in fact, in many of the ways, all the Buddhist teachings can fit nicely into that framework. And I use this analogy a lot. That Buddha would say that a bird needs two wings, wisdom and compassion. So wisdom, if you like, is this emotional awareness, is this knowing our own mind intimately and well. And we're going to be going to this one. So that on the basis of that, we can be of benefit to the world, which is the compassion wing, if you like. So, okay, as far as Buddha is concerned, what is the mind? Well, first of all, the word mind and the word consciousness are used virtually synonymously in Buddhist psychology and Buddhist philosophy. Used in different contexts, but essentially they're referring to the same thing. First point. Second point, you know, and this is not evident immediately, but we take this as a hypothesis here, is that our mind or our consciousness is not itself physical. It's not a function of the brain. It's not itself the brain. I mean, this sounds shocking if we're a neuroscientist and a psychologist. We'll laugh at that. But this is not a contradiction. And this is why these last 30, 40 years, in fact, there's been amazing talks and discussions between especially the Dalai Lama and many of the Tibetan Buddhist scholars, including Western scholars, and modern scientists. And much of this stuff has been published. It's really very fascinating, you know. And as we know, and all of this, you know, and this has been the very topic of what is consciousness, what is the mind, how do we function? So as we know, like I think late 20th century, some of the findings about neuroplasticity, you know. One scientist said it's the greatest finding of the 20th century, that we're not stuck with the brain we're born with, that we can change our brain. Well, you know, meaning for us, change our mind. Well, I'm glad we're catching up with the Buddha, who's been saying this for 2,500 years, you know, and that's why it's very compelling for us philosophical materialists to be able to verify some of these things that seem to be mystical and unprovable by using our own tools. And that, I must say, that's one of the marvelous things about the Dalai Lama, this extraordinary way he's able to connect with people, both of other religions, but also of scientific and philosophical viewpoints, which gives us courage, you know. So the mind is not physical. It doesn't mean the brain doesn't play a role. It doesn't mean the neuroscience is wrong. It's just a different way of presenting things, you know. And this will come up, we'll discuss. So your mind is not physical. The crucial point about the mind from the Buddhist view, this is crucial, is, and this is coming from these Indians, is that we've got these far more subtle levels of mind than we would posit in science and psychology. And this is coming, and these Indians are the ones who first learned to access this. This technique that the world vaguely knows as mindfulness meditation, in fact, is this extraordinarily sophisticated psychological skill that enables us to completely harness the berserk conceptual energy, you know, uncontrolled conceptual energy of our mind, as well as completely subdue the sensory level of our mind to go to these more subtle levels. And this is not a mystical thing. Please believe me. It's not something, Buddha doesn't assert such a thing as a soul or a spirit. He doesn't use words like that. He uses the word mind to encompass first all the intellectual level, emotional, unconscious, subconscious, instinct, intuition, the entire spectrum of our inner being. The word mind or consciousness for the Buddha encompasses all of that, you know. So that we have these more subtle levels of mind, more subtle levels of our capacity for cognition. Of course, in our modern materialist views, this is like a cosmic joke, because it does not, this part of your mind does not depend upon the brain. And that's where many of these you know, experiments on the minds of meditators are now beginning to prove these points, which is marvelous, you know. So the other point about the mind, and this is a bit of a shock to us, both if we're a religious person who asserts a creator, God made us, or if we're a philosophical materialist and we assert that our mummy and daddy made us, well, Buddha disagrees with both. A creator, he doesn't have a concept like that. And as far as parents are concerned, of course they play a role. They give us a body. I mean, they work very hard for that egg and sperm to come together, you know. And that egg and sperm is the basis of our body. But because we say the body includes the brain, which means the mind, not for the Buddha. Yes, they give us a brain. They give us genes, DNA. And the way I would say it kind of loosely, all of these physical parts of us are the indicators of what's going on in our consciousness. So our consciousness is our mind, which includes, as I said, our thoughts, feelings, emotions, our tendencies, our personality traits, our love, our hate, our psychosis, our being good at football, our being good at music, our being kind or generous. These are all our personality traits, our tendencies. And these are part of our mind, and they're not the handiwork of our parents. So we're not the handiwork of our parents. They give us a body, how kind. And we are certainly not, for the Buddha, the handiwork of a creator. No function, nothing like that for the Buddha. So of course this demands then we have to ask the question, where does this stuff come from? Where does love and compassion, you know, and my goodness and whatever come from? It was not from a creator and not from my parents. And in both of those cases we know we start in the mummy's womb. Well, not for the Buddha. Our consciousness, and this is a fundamental part of the Buddhist view, the world view, and this indeed also is from Buddha's observation. Our mind, our consciousness, think of it as like a river of mental moments. There's a term even in Buddhist psychology where this mental continuum. So this moment of my mind necessarily comes from the previous moment of my mind. And this moment of my cognition, my capacity for cognition, my thoughts, my feelings, my emotions, comes from the previous moment of my mind. And if we could have perfect memory, we know we could track it back in an unbroken chain of mental moments. And you inexorably would get back to the first second of conception. So then the question is, what about the moment before conception? Well, the moment before conception, the egg was in mummy's body, sperm was in daddy's body, but where was your mind? The continuity of these tendencies that is our own consciousness. Well, it's got its own momentum. Because the mind is not physical, then the mind can be tracked back to a moment before that. And then a few weeks before that, this consciousness was in a previous body, and so on and so forth. And this is the stuff, again, as I'm saying, of Buddhist philosophy, Buddhist psychology. It's a huge aspect of the entire view in Buddhism, the worldview. And your mind keeps going back. And indeed, when we die, consciousness will continue. That's the Buddha's view. Well, it was the Indians before that. So, okay, roughly speaking, that's our mind. So then, if it is so that I can even change my mind, lessen my neuroses and grow my goodness, which is implied by the word Buddha, then you'd have to ask the question, why would I want to do that? What's the reason? What's the logic? Well, it's very simple for the Buddha. Check the last time you were depressed, anxious, angry, low self-esteem, arrogant, upset, you name it. It was miserable. Pretty clear, you know. And then check the last time you were kind, loving, joyful. It was nice. I'm speaking really simply. So one way of framing and presenting all of Buddha's philosophy and teachings is in terms of it's being a method for stopping suffering and getting happiness. One way of saying it. Another way of framing it, and they all come to the same thing, is a method for, is a system of ethics. Absolutely, fundamental. And at the same time, it's also a system for stopping ignorance and getting wisdom. So maybe we're not sure we want wisdom. Maybe ethics is okay. We all want happiness, that's a fact. But all of these things in Buddhist philosophy and practice come together. They're just different doorways into the same thing. And we'll kind of unpack all this, you know. So if it's so that I can lessen neuroses and jealousy and depression, that implies I can lessen suffering. Because the Buddha's view, fundamental, the main source of our suffering is what's in here. Tibetans point here for the mind. And the main source, the Buddha's view says, for our happiness is in here. So this already, this is a pretty simple statement, but kind of shocking. Because as far as we're concerned, since we're children, Mummy didn't have to teach us this, and if you observe the behaviour of dogs and monkeys and ants, we all agree that happiness and suffering come from out there. Pretty clear. And that is absolutely the basis of our presentation of how reality is in the philosophical modern, in the materialist philosophical world. When, you know, we, as far as we're concerned, aren't we? I mean, in English we say, I didn't ask to get born. I mean, we mean that quite sincerely. We did not ask to get born. It's nothing to do with me. Someone else plonked me on this planet. And then it seems to be happiness and suffering are kind of like the product of good luck and bad luck. You cross your fingers and hope for the best. And it all comes from out there. And we believe this utterly, and we do not question. So this alone, we can spend the weekend very happily looking at this logically and trying to see the Buddha's approach, that this is not valid. That it's a misconception. Not a moralistic thing. He's not trying to sort of be mean to us. But as far as he's concerned, the main source of our life, the main source of our happiness and suffering, and indeed both long-term and short-term, but let's look at the short-term first, which, you know, is what's going on here. And in many ways we can prove this immediately and easily from our own experiences. But we don't put two and two together. Because why? Because we have various assumptions deep in our bones. And these assumptions, the Buddha would say, are actually a function of this ego of ours, the way he describes the way ego works. And we'll go into all this, you know. So he says they're false assumptions, but they're very instinctive. I mean, when I was a little girl, and my sister was mean to me, and I'd be bursting into tears and running to Mummy, I would assert that Janet was mean to me. She is the cause of my suffering. She did this and she did that. And no one would argue with that. We all feel that in our lives. So this is why, if we analyse our lives, we spend our lives trying to get the events, the people, the things, the sounds, the smells, the tastes, that are the ones that such when we have contact with them will trigger happy feelings in us, and we try to avoid the things, the events, the people, the smells, the tastes, such that when we have contact with them, they will cause suffering. It's pretty evident. So Buddha gets us fundamentally to question this assumption, and this is the basis of Buddhist practice, and the practice is in our mind. So there are various things kind of conspiring against our doing this job. It's pretty clear. And the first one, like I said, this deeply, primordially instinctive assumption, instinctive belief, which we never question, that what goes on out there is the main source of my happiness and suffering, which is exactly why we spend our lives trying to manipulate the world to make it just so that I'll get happy and avoid the miserable stuff. We kind of know this so automatically that it seems a little bit shocking to question it, you know. But this is the fundamental, this is the basis of the view in Buddhism. It's the basis of the entire Buddhist view, philosophy, psychology, practice. So part of the problem when we talk like this you know, because we have this assumption that, you know, that religion is coming from a creator, and we know that the idea of a creator is that this person runs the show, is the boss, and that means they hold the power to tell us what to do, and then if we don't do it, we get punished, and if we do it, we get rewarded. And I'm not being sarcastic here. This is fundamentally how it is, and that's our view of morality. So when we hear things in religious terms, don't do this and do that, we feel very squashed. You know, it sounds a bit like Mr. Stalin or something. You know, except maybe a bit more benign sometimes. So let's look at this fundamental assumption first. I've got a Jesuit priest friend, a Catholic priest friend. I remember, and I asked him, you know, I asked him, tell me the definition. What is the definition of a sin? And it's very clear for the Christians and the Jews and the Muslims. It's very clear that it's an action you do that is against the will of God. It's doing what God said not to do. Now, I'm not criticizing this view. I think if you live your life with faith in a creator and you do what he says, you'll be happy. I'm not complaining, but it's just not Buddha's view, that's all. And I'm trying to question this view, look at this view as being an assumption, you know, that we all have fairly instinctively. That morality is doing what someone else tells you you should do, and if you do it, you'll get rewarded, and if you don't do it, you get punished. This is a very dualistic view, and this is absolutely the view we have. So it's going against the will of God, you know. So because God is the boss, God creates the universe, God is the source of everything, in me and the laws, God holds the power to punish and reward. This is pretty primordial in us. Well, look at it, you know, in my mother's household, it was exactly the same. When my mother says, don't do that, of course I'll say, why not? And we know her answer, because I say so. So that's how we live our lives. It's going to be the police, the government, the judge, mummy, daddy, God. That's the view we have of morality and ethics, you know. You're doing what someone else says you should do, and if you do it, you'll get rewarded. If you don't do it, you get punished. Well, there's no concept like that in Buddhism, because Buddha's not a creator. He doesn't assert a creator. So therefore, there's no punishment. There's in this concept in Buddhism, and we're going to be talking in this, we're going to look at ethics, because it's the basis of beginning to work on our mind. It sounds just like Jesus, you know. Buddha would have, you know, entry-level junior school grade 1 entry into Buddhist practice is to don't kill. Buddha exhorts us not to kill, not to lie, not to jump on the wrong partner, not to steal, not to badmouth people. Sounds like Jesus. Sounds like your grandma, you know. So, but the point is here, and this is a crucial point. It's not just splitting hairs. You should ask the question, why not? It's appropriate, but we believe anything anyone tells us. That's how we suffer, you know. We do what someone says because we should be, because I'm trying to be a good girl. No. It's valid to ask your mother why not. And if she says because I say so, okay, that's up to you to decide. And it's the same with Christianity. It's the same with Buddhism. The Buddha says don't kill. So does Jesus. So the reason Jesus says it is because God says not to. And I remember this priest, he told me that the idea of sin being mainly that God said not to do it, that's what gives it the character of the action being a negative action, a sin. He said there is some aspect of natural law, meaning it's killing is wrong because people suffer, but the real reason it makes it negative. And this is quite a powerful point philosophically. But for the Buddha, you ask him, why not, Buddha? Why shouldn't I kill? Well, there's two things here. For Buddha, in general, the answer to the question, what is a negative action? The Christians call it a sin. He said, and the main level of it, the main heaviest level of negative actions for the Buddha, it's an action that harms another. Pretty straightforward. Do your market research in this room. Who likes to be killed, lied to, stolen from, jumped on by some uninvited person? Nobody. So that's what defines it as a negative action, because it harms others. That's the natural law part. And as far as Buddha is concerned, that's all there is. There is only natural law. There's no equivalent in Buddhism in a big fundamental way of being an equivalent of God's law. And that's what we take very much for granted. There's God's law, and if you chuck out religion, you only got natural law. Well, if you're a Buddhist, there is only natural law. There's no equivalent, because Buddha is not the boss. He is not a creator. He did not make things. It's not his job. So in a sense, it's a very powerful idea. And this is really the basis of a person who is attempting to use Buddhism in their life. You know, so we've got to look at the reason then. So if it's true that a negative action at the first heaviest level is one that harms another. So but the reason at the very beginning levels of practice that Buddha would exhort us not to kill and not to steal and not to lie is, he says, it's not because it harms others. He says it's because it will harm you. This is the one that's really tough to look at. So of course from the bigger picture point of view, he's looking at past lives and future lives, but forget that one. Let's look into this life. Let's look into right now, and this is really logical. This can be scientifically proved, but we just don't like it. This is powerful. The Buddha's view is that what goes on in our mind, every millisecond of what goes on in here, and then on the basis of that, every millisecond of what we do with our body and speech. You know, I like to think of our body and speech as the servants of our mind. You know, if you hear me shouting angry words, you can deduce there must be anger in my mind. If I'm giving someone, you know, giving someone something and smiling, you can deduce there's generosity in my mind. So what goes on in the mind for the Buddha, and then what we do on the basis of what's in our mind with our body and speech, this, forget about what it does to others, but this process, millisecond by millisecond, is what produces us. This is the meaning of karma in a general sense, cause and effect. That what we do, say and think, even in the short term we can see this. If you spend your day on your own, in your house, and there's no one else there, but you're shouting and yelling at the television, you're shouting and yelling at your iPad, and you read the bad news, you're cursing your next door neighbour, you know, no one hears you, how do you think you'll feel by the end of the day? Exhausted. Whom have you harmed? Not another person, but you. So this is the thing, because we hear this stuff as moralistic, but we say, but I'm allowed to say what I like, we say. I'm allowed to say what I like, we say. I'm allowed to think what I like, we say. So the implication of that, and this is the thing that takes us time, is that, of course you are, you're the boss. But all the Buddha's saying is, it has consequences. Not heavy duty, you're going to get punished, not like that. No, you harm yourself. If you shout and yell all day, if you have crazy jealous thoughts all day, if you get depressed all day, and I'm not being critical here, this is not being judgmental, this is the basis of why we would want to become familiar with our mind and learn to change it. Because you know why? Because I'm sick of suffering. But because we hear it as moralistic, and then secondly because we strongly believe that I am depressed because that happened, I'm jealous because my boyfriend cheated, I'm angry because the boss was mean to me. So we have this sense of kind of hurt righteousness. But I'm allowed to be angry. Look at what they did to me. You are allowed to be angry. You are allowed to be jealous. You are allowed to be anxious, neurotic, attached, low self-esteem. Of course we are allowed to be. No one's telling us we shouldn't be. We're the boss. But all the Buddha's trying to get us to see is, honey child, it's breaking your heart. It's hurting you. But because we hear it as moralistic, we hear it as righteousness, we hear it as someone else as the blame, so you know, therefore I'm allowed to be this way. It's kind of very schizophrenic, really. And in one sense, all Buddha's saying is, you know what, babes? What goes on in here is the source of your happiness and suffering. There's a saying in Buddhism that if you can change something, hey, please change it. But what if you can't? And we all know in our lives, we often cannot change certain situations, no matter how hard we try. But we bash our heads against brick walls day after day, kind of hoping it'll change. Because why? Because then we think when it changes, I'll get happy. But Buddha says, no, there's a quicker method. Just change your mind. And it's cheaper. I mean, these words are not complicated, you know. These words are not complicated. I'm saying it in a very colloquial, down-to-earth way, which I really think is important, because as soon as we hear it as Buddhist psychology, we get all kind of ridiculous. We lose our common sense and hear it as religion, you know. But this is practical advice. And that's the essence of the Buddhist approach, you know. It's practical advice. It's practical advice of how to ensure that I can learn to be content and fulfilled and become this marvelous human being that he says we've all got the potential to become for my own sake. First, for my own sake. That's the wisdom wing. Then on the basis of that, I can go, oh my God, look at the rest of the world, we're all in the same boat. Now I can be useful to them. So it's working on our own mind. As one of my teachers, Lamiye, she says, being our own therapist. So, but you know, Buddhist practice is very much incremental. So it's like junior school level. You know, you got to control your body and speech first. You got to, if you jump on every partner you fancy, every person, if you eat every piece of cake you feel like, if you kill everything you don't like, if you say every word you feel like saying, you'll be a berserk mad person. Believe me. So how can you possibly look at your mind? How can you possibly meditate, you know? That's high school. That's being your own therapist. That's high school. So you've got to first harness the crazy energy of our behaviour in order to then give us more space to begin to get some of this concentration, these ingenious Indians invented thousands of years ago, this marvellous skill that enables us to harness our crazy mind. And don't hold your breath, it takes time. But we can begin it somewhere, and we'll do some. We'll discuss it and try some methods out. Because that's just a practical skill that enables us to do the actual job of becoming familiar in much more intimate, more subtle ways with the workings of our own mind, in order to unpack and unravel and deconstruct the contents of our own mind beneath the emotional component, where we get to see this cognitive process. Buddha, in some sense, is a cognitive therapist, and that's not a joke. It's a literal truth, you know. So the job of being a Buddhist, first and foremost, is becoming familiar with your own mind, controlling your body and speech, which is shared by anybody. It's shared by good communists, good Buddhists, and your grandma. Behave nicely. Don't harm sentient beings. But the Buddhist view, that's like the preparation for you to now have the ability to get more in touch with what's happening in here, you know. And this is not a cosmic thing, I promise. Because again, as soon as we hear the word meditation, we lose all common sense. We think it's something mystical. We think what goes in here is something mystical. No, it's not. And we have to learn to become deeply familiar with it. So of course the words, these words are not complicated. But to do it is the hardest job we'll ever do. Why? First, as I'm just saying, because we believe in our bones that what goes on out there is the main thing to be changing, the main thing to be looking at, the main thing to be worried about, the main thing to avoid or to get. And that's how we spend our lives, you know. That's the major obstacle. And that doesn't mean we don't change the world. It doesn't mean we just sit there and change our mind. That's ridiculous. Of course we change it. We can do what we can, you know. But the crucial point for the Buddha is that what goes on in here is the main thing. The main thing. The main thing. The main thing. And that working with this, it becomes the source of our own contentment, fulfillment, clarity, joy, kindness, and then ability to be clear and strong and be able to make the world a better place. There's no question. So just familiarity with our mind. You know? Familiarity with our mind. Deep familiarity. And in a very specific way that's quite different in some ways from the way we think when we go to our therapist. We'll discuss this. So far so good? Okay, are there any questions so far about terminology, anything I'm saying? Because I'm now going to start unpacking these ideas, okay? Okay.
I have a question.
Yes, sweetheart, go.
So you're saying that...
We need a microphone for the people who talk.
I'm trying to talk louder.
I know, but I think they're recording it, aren't they? Are you recording this? You people? Where's Marius? They all gone. Are we recording this? Are we recording this?
Yes.
Okay, good. Audio or
Thank
video?
you.
Audio or video?
Both.
Oh, okay, where's the camera?
They're on
Oh.
the table.
Okay, thank you. It's not streaming, is it? Is it streaming as well? Is it streaming as well?
No.
Okay. Okay, darling,
Thank you very much. So you were saying that according to the Buddhism teaching, it is not the Buddha who created the world. And this is obvious because he was a prince and he was a man.
The what?
Actually. A prince.
That's not
Buddha.
the reason. That's not the reason.
No,
he didn't
yeah,
create it.
but
that's not. But Jesus was a person too, but he was
Yeah.
God in human form, wasn't
Exactly.
he? No, Buddha is. Better way to put it is that Buddha does. His philosophical view has no. It does not assert the concept of a creator. That's
Right.
what I'm saying.
So that's actually my question.
Yeah.
If there isn't a creator,
That's right.
then how
We'll go into
everything
it.
here
We
came into
create
place?
ourselves.
And what about the world outside?
We'll create the world as well. I know it sounds silly, but I'll unpack it for you.
Mountains, trees, planets,
Everything, the
stars.
works, the lot. I will explain it to you. I
Okay.
know it sounds hilariously funny. Both as a scientist or as a Christian, it sounds ridiculous, but I will unpack the ideas as well as I can for you. That's called the law of karma.
Okay,
I'll go into it.
thank you.
Thank you very much.
you.
Thank you. What else? And not often is that question asked either. It's very curious. That question is an unusual question too, I have to say. Although it's a fairly evident, obvious question, isn't it? Who else? Anybody else? Yes. Yes. Pass the microphone to. Yes.
You mentioned natural law. How would you define natural law?
A little bit louder.
You mentioned natural law.
Yes.
How would you define natural law and its origin?
It's a really perfect question, yeah. I really like you Romanians. Are you Romanian? You know, I like you wherever you are as well. Where are you from?
California.
Oh, okay, well done. Okay, exactly. Okay, so would you agree that without botany is natural law? Would you agree with that?
Symptomatic or a cause of natural law.
Oh, okay. Symptomatic or cause of. So you think there's something? Oh, that's curious. I would say it is okay. Symptom of. So natural law, it seems to me. Okay, what's a botanist? A botanist is a person who observes the world. Yeah, would you agree? Observes the world. Observes what's there. In terms of gardens, let's say, in terms of things that grow on this planet. That person has observed it and investigated it and gone into it and articulated the way it works. Would you agree with that? And that's what natural law is. In other words, God's law is because God is a creator who made it. And he's the inventor of it. But the natural law means there's no inventor. A botanist doesn't invent botany. Einstein didn't invent relativity. Einstein used his noggin, he used his intelligence, he observed the way the universe is and articulated what he observed and said this is how it works. Would you agree with that?
Under the principle that we're...
A bit louder, darling.
Under the principle that we're equating the observer with the thing being observed.
Well, what else is there? There are minds, okay, Buddhist view, there are minds, consciousnesses, and then there is stuff. So it seems to me Einstein's mind observed the stuff and came up with relativity. You know, a botanist's mind observed the stuff and articulated laws, and then you take those laws and you go verify them for yourself. Would you agree with that?
Yes, but wouldn't these all be causal of natural law?
Pardon?
These would all be, these are coming from natural law.
But they are an expression of this natural, natural law for me is the opposite of God's law, is what I'm trying to say. It's the way things are. It's the way things are. It's the way things are. Mathematics. Some clever Arab fellow, you know, went to contradict the silly old Italians and their X's and V's and came up from 0 to 9. He didn't make up numbering. There were always 5 oranges on the table before the Arab fellow came along, but he gave a label upon it. That's natural law. It is what exists. It's there. And our minds observe it. What else is there but minds? That's the Buddhist view. There are only minds and there's matter. That's it.
Okay, but going back to the original question, the origin of natural law, it just is.
Yeah, things that just are as they are. Would you agree with that? Or do you want something, do you think there's something more there? It's a really perfect point.
Well, natural law has structure. Can we agree to that?
Absolutely, it has to be. That's the point about what law means. Once you've established the laws of botany, you establish it, you get the result, you can replicate it every time. Absolutely, that's the point. Yeah.
So how do you create order?
What?
How do you create order?
What do you mean create order?
Well, we can equate order with structure, right?
Well, I mean, what do you mean by structure?
So natural law is
Okay,
order.
the way the world we live on this planet. So let's just take this piece of the planet that you and I, most of us, can see with our eyes and touch with our fingers and smell with our noses. And then what our scientists have come up, or people who call themselves, we call them scientists, have observed the workings of this planet and articulated what they've seen, and said this is the way of articulating how anyway it already is. So this conceptual way of presenting, numbers are conceptuality. Botany is conceptuality. Gravity is conceptuality. The laws of the Buddha, the law of karma, which I'm about to, her question, I'm going to answer that. That, for the Buddha, is just a way of presenting conceptually what Buddha has already observed to be the way things are.
So philosophically, can we equate it to the question, if a tree falls in the forest, does it make a sound?
What? Say it again? If
a tree falls in the forest, does it make a sound? It sounds like we're saying a thing cannot exist unless there's an observer.
Well, you can say it like that. When you hear what I'm saying, you're going to agree, in a sense, that's true, yes. The Buddha's view. So the Buddha, yeah, this is true. With the Buddha's view, there is only consciousness, and there's matter. That's it. And this is where she said, you mean that we even create the streams and the mountains, or whatever she said. And to understand this one, okay, just jumping ahead a bit. This is so fun. It's very funny. People, I love you. So, are we agreeing on natural law or not? Never mind all those extra bits you just said. The fundamental principle.
On principle, so first principle, can we define what natural law, or I'm actually interested in your definition.
I'm saying it is the way things are, it's the way things are. And someone comes up, and a mind observes it. As opposed to God made it, is my real point here. My real point is to make the distinction between the Christian teaching, which is the usual assumption of religious teachings, that it's God, a being who created it, and that's God's law. It's mainly, the point is to distinguish between that, in the same way that we did with, what's his name, Mr. That Italian, what's his name, with a G? Galileo. He's the naughty person who started making trouble, wasn't he? Started questioning the Christians, you know, God's law. Are we communicating at that level? Or are you not happy still? It's perfectly fine not to be. Please keep talking.
Well, I'm not sure if I'm dealing with semantics, but if natural law is the way things are,
yes,
but natural law is ordered.
Well, it would
how
be,
is
yes.
That order
yeah.
correct? How is that order created? What is that first?
It's not. Oh, now you're getting where you want to go. Yeah. You want to know the first moment of it.
First principle.
Okay, honey. Big mistake. For Buddha, that's. I hear you now, and now I get you. Now I understand where you're coming from. For the Buddha, that's it's a mistaken question. It's a misconception. And what that question assumes deep in our bones is this philosophy that we all got, that somehow there is a first cause. That's the mistake, and I'm not being arrogant here, what do I know? It's the mistake of looking for the first Big Bang. It's, as Dalai Lama said one time in all his questions with the scientists, Big Bang, no problem. Just not the first Big Bang, that's all. So the Buddha's view is that there's only consciousness and there's only matter. And the Buddha's view still uses the concept which Galileo and that mob used to talk, the matter's made of the 4 elements. Now we have a billion different elements, right? And that's the model, especially in the esoteric teachings in Buddhism, and that's the basis of the Tibetan medical system, that all physical matter is made of the 4 elements. That's it. There's the 4 elements, and then there's minds, and that's the universe. And the minds run the show. The minds in the way they work and act, and this is the law of karma. And excuse me, this is like, I studied this for 35 years in the Tibetan monastic university system, so I can only talk so fast. But I'll attempt to give the principles of this. So therefore, logically, if the law, so the fundamental law that runs the universe as far as Buddha is concerned, is the law, he calls it the law of karma, which is meaning shorthand, it's Sanskrit, means action, implying reaction, the law of cause and effect. So if we posit a law of cause and effect, every millisecond I take of anything, this cup, if we track this cup back from the Buddhist perspective, taking this model that is the 4 elements, this stuff came from this moment, which came from that, which came from this, the clay and the paint, and you keep going back, and every millisecond you posit that amount of stuff that ends up as the cup. It was this, and that came from that, didn't it? And that at that moment came from this, and that came from that. Would you agree with that? Pretty simply. And if you would get back inexorably, in whatever way we've discovered it in the scientific world, to what we call the first Big Bang. But then crucially, whatever is the substance of the first Big Bang has to come from itself, from a previous moment of stuff. So you cannot have a first moment of stuff, and you cannot have a first moment of mind. So the Christian view, I'm not being rude, but it's clear, the Buddha would say one of the fundamental mistakes deep in our bones, a philosophical view that's so instinctive, that somehow we think that we have a view that somehow there can be things that aren't caused. So the concept of God is why a creator for the Buddha is a mistake. It's something that's not caused. It's a meaningless idea. You can't have a not caused thing. That's why if you're a naughty boy at school, who made God, you're told to be quiet. So we've made that view. We've posited upon consciousnesses the idea that there's one of those called God, called the Creator, who made everything. Buddha disagrees with that view completely. So mind and matter are beginningless. There's no first. There can't be a first thing. There can't be a thing that didn't have a previous cause. So as mad and nutty as it sounds to us, even as I say it, because emotionally we believe there's going to be, where did I begin? Where did suffering begin? Where did the universe begin? Where did humans begin? Where did my suffering begin? When I go to my therapist, we're going to look into the past like looking for a needle in a haystack. Oh, where did my anger begin? Where did my depression begin? That's a very primordial one in all of us. And the Buddha argues with that completely. Relative I mean, this cup did begin at some point. It all came together and functioned as a cup at 3 minutes past 9 when it came out of the oven. But all of this stuff is coming from previous, and you can never have a first one.
It's interesting. I would say the cup originally came from someone's mind.
Oh, it does. No, you're right. But we're talking about the physical substance itself. You're absolutely right. Cups do come from minds. Everything does for the Buddha. The creation business. We'll get to it. But the cup itself, when we look at the substance. It's got its own specific substantial causes. And mind itself, being not physical, has its own substantial causes too, which is that previous moment of non-physical consciousness. Yes,
Thank you.
good. Thank you very much. Okay, let's unpack all this stuff. We'll leave the karma one alone for now. We'll look at the mind. Okay, we'll go to high school. We'll leave behaviour alone. Okay. So there's two things. When you study the mind in Buddhist, the Tibetan monastic university system, which is the basis of what I'm speaking in this room, the little bit that I've studied, you learn first the epistemological model of the mind, which itself is beyond fascinating. How the mind functions, not the brain, how the cognitive process itself. And I mean, I think modern scientists will be totally interested, and are becoming interested, in this, in the way that the mind is described, epistemologically, the way it functions. It's beyond fascinating, but the key point I want to make here is this one point, which already implies, is very tasty, and it implies the way our mind, the contents of our mind, which is the second one, which is the psychological model, the contents of our mind, and I want to go into that one. That's what I'm going to talk about. But a really interesting point already. It's very telling. So in the epistemological model, one way of dividing, we can say we've got sensory consciousness and we have mental consciousness. That's it. So sensory consciousness, as Lama Yeshe says, we make the body the boss. Our body and our bodily experiences, our sensory experiences, completely actually run the show. We give enormous power to them, and for the Buddha already this is a massive mistake. Not moralistically, but practically. We give too much power to our senses that they don't have, so we mislead ourselves. So we have sensory consciousness. Okay, so to be very precise about it, we've got eye consciousness, for example. So eye consciousness, technically for the Buddha, remember the word consciousness means mind and it's not physical. So there's eyeball, the physical. So eye consciousness is that part of my mind that functions through the medium of the eyeball to cognize something. Mind, its function is to cognize. So what does eye consciousness cognize? Well, I might look over here and I will say, oh, that's a pretty cup. So naturally, we will all deduce, without question, that my eyes see a pretty cup. Not true. It's giving way too much power to the eyeball for a start. So in fact, the way they describe in Buddhist psychology, the sensory consciousnesses are like a really profoundly limited in their capacity for cognition. So all parts of our mind, when you study the mind in more depth in Buddhism, every moment of your mind has its own specific object, the specific thing that it cognizes. And this is very much part of the process of learning to be our own therapist, learning to unpack and unravel the way our mind functions and getting accurate in all this. So technically for the Buddha, eye consciousness can cognize precisely two things: shape and color. That's it. So the obvious question is, well, what part of my mind is cognizing a pretty cup? Well, this is what happens. This is how it works. My eyes go over here, and you'll hear coming out my mouth, without much space, because I have opinions pretty quickly, even if I'm wrong, you understand? Out will come the thought, out will come the words, what a pretty cup. So now, that's not a function, it can't be of my eye consciousness. What happens is this: my mental consciousness is now accessed. And this is, they point here, the Tibetans, it's interesting. And now this is really true, the way they talk about how the mind works. Quicker than Google. The millisecond my eyes see that, instantaneously, all the information that I've stored in my memory. And an interesting point in Buddhist psychology is, and Buddhist philosophy, that there's not a millisecond of anything we ever experience through any part of our mind that goes astray. Everything is stored. It's like one Lama Zopa says, it's like we're taking pictures, photos, all day, and the images are all stored in our mind. That's why we can remember anything at all. To the degree that I've stored any memories at all in my life of what I like, what's pretty, what's not. I remember it's a cup, I remember it's this, I remember that there's pretty birds, there's flowers, there's this, the colours, and it's all stored in there what I like, my opinions. So basically, what came out of my mouth is words. Words are expression of thoughts, and thoughts are a function at the grosser level of our mental consciousness, and they're basically conceptual stories. They're basically concepts, and are all concepts for the Buddha. This is the stuff of our mental consciousness, and this is what we're going to go into. They're all opinions. They're viewpoints. They're opinions. They're viewpoints. A concept is a viewpoint. That is a pretty cup. What's your name? Yours. Can't hear you. Spell it for me, do you mind?
Jabari.
Oh, Jabari, okay. Huh? Was it? Jabari, yeah. Where's it come from? Well, how come your mummy gave you that name? Your dad gave you that name, okay. Good, thank you, Jabari. Okay, let's say I say, you know, oh, that Jabari, you don't have to trust Jabari, you know, he cheated on his girlfriend. That's an opinion. What? V. Oh, B. Jabari. Okay, sorry. Okay, so you know so then basically we will, you know, and especially if you know about Jabari cheating on his girlfriend, you say, yeah, I said, no, I agree with you, Robina. So that's an opinion. It's a viewpoint. Now the point is, it might be a valid opinion. That's the point the Buddha's saying. So we look into the mental consciousness. What's really happening in the world is we are coming out of our mouths, and in our thoughts, we're just driven by millions of viewpoints. And the Buddha divides them into two categories. There are some that are ridiculous, deluded, neurotic, fear-based, emotions, anger, jealousy, depression. They're conceptual stories deep in our bones from much practice, that because we practice so strongly, they now come out as virtually instinctive, pouring out my mouth, and my body is very involved. So when you see me shouting and yelling at Jabari, because I think he cheated on me, you go, oh, look at that, Robina's angry. Well, analyse that. That's just the body. The body is just doing this crazy thing. But analyse, the body is the servant of what's in my mind. The mind is labelled an angry thought. It's thoughts deep down, but it's super emotional because the body's involved. But it's a conceptual story. Jabari did this. That's a pretty cup. That's an iPad. So some conceptual stories, because the Buddha's view is we live at this conceptual level, including emotions. And that's what we're going to get to. Including our emotions. We say here is conceptual, and we say here is emotional. For the Buddha, it's all conceptual. But some of them because they're so instinctive, such as anger, I've practiced it for so long that now my body is seriously involved. And in the more esoteric teachings in Buddhism, the Vajrayana system, this is where we have to understand the view about karma and everything. It's the model that talks about the four elements and the mind. There's a really intimate connection between the physical and the mental. But what's going on is in the mind, and it's a series of extreme conceptual opinions. Jabari did this. How dare he do this? He is the cause of all my suffering. Blah, blah, blah. Or equally, oh, Jabari is the kindest guy you'll ever meet. And you're full of, you know, tears coming out of my eyes, full of compassion. My body's involved, but the emotion is there, but you unpack it and unravel it, you're going to see it's a series of conceptual stories deep in my bones that I've practiced thinking. So rooted down into the thinking process, but at a much subtler level than we can imagine. And only when we really get this single point of concentration are we able to do the unpacking and unraveling to the degree that Buddha says we can, you know. But we can do plenty in our daily lives. So whatever's coming out the mouth is an expression of what's in my mind. And whatever's in my mind, we look into the psychological model, and we're going to go into this now. You've got the neurotic states of mind, you've got the valid states of mind, and they're the two main ones we live in. We live in those. And there's a third category. And these are ones I like to call these the mechanics of the mind. The capacity to have good memory, to discriminate between this and that, to concentrate. Many of these parts of our mind, and they're like the mechanics. So whether you're a murderer or a meditator, you need good concentration. So these particular states of mind, they call them in this model negative, positive, and neutral. It sounds kind of cute. Neutral is misleading because we think that means they're not important. They're super important. They enable us to function, whether we're murdering somebody or meditating, but they're not in their nature, don't have this particular character, which in Buddhist psychology is really important to understand. They don't have the character of being valid or virtuous, or ridiculous and invalid and non-virtuous, or neurotic and negative. And these are very specific terms in Buddhist psychology. They're not judgmental, they're not punitive, they're not neurotic, they're not kind of like judgment, they're not like saying you're good or bad, but they're the way that Buddha describes the contents of our mental consciousness. And so this mental consciousness of ours, it's got these far more subtle levels, which we can only access when we do the single point of concentration, this mindfulness meditation, this technique that the Buddha took from the Hindus. I mean, they invented it thousands of years ago, these geniuses, you know. So we start where we are, which is the gross level. We start where we are. So that's why at junior school, if I can see that, in my life I vomit out my angry thoughts, then my first level of practice has to be to control the speech, zip the lip. Not suppress, but at least don't vomit out my angry thoughts and kill Jabari, before it's too late. That's right. So basically, what we're going to talk about now is the psychological model, which is the contents of our consciousness, the contents of our thoughts and feelings and emotions. That's the stuff of Buddhist psychology. And working with this, unpacking it, unraveling it, identifying it, and reconfiguring it, that's the job of being a Buddhist. That's why you would meditate. That's why you'd so-called be a Buddhist. To lessen the neuroses and grow the goodness, bottom line, Why? Because you get happier, and then also you'll be kinder and wiser to others. Kind of practical stuff, I'm not trying to make it complicated. Am I making it sound complicated? No? Good. I'm happy. Is your tea break scheduled in? What time's tea break? What time did you want tea break? What time is it now?
It's 11:10.
What time is lunch?
1.
Okay.
Oh, you have
I'm fine. Leave me alone. I'm okay. I mean, don't leave me. You're so kind. I'm fine. Thank you. Thank you so much. So we'll keep talking, okay? Okay. So let's now start looking a bit more deeply into these states of mind and try to comprehend this idea of there being neurotic, deluded, fear-based, ridiculous states of mind that make us miserable and cause us to harm others, and valid, reasonable, appropriate states of mind that make us happy and cause us to be of benefit to others, and not hear it in a moralistic, punitive way, but in a practical way, so we can start being our own therapists and developing our marvellous potential. Okay, so in the first category, this negative, non-virtuous, neurotic, there are many synonyms, There are two main, the word they use in Buddhist psychology coming, from India, the Sanskrit word for this rubbish stuff, this neurotic stuff that breaks our hearts and makes us miserable and causes us to harm others, is the source of our suffering. The term they use in Sanskrit is just this one main word, klesha, and it's usually translated very accurately as the English word affliction. But certainly in English, I don't know about Romanian. I discovered from when we were in Bucharest, there's no real modern phrase in Romanian either. So it's very arcane. So as soon as you say you have an affliction, if you're a Buddhist, you kind of suddenly think it's like different. It's like different from, it's just a weird word. It's kind of old. It's kind of, for me, it's a useless word. It's ridiculous. So what's another word for affliction? Well, the word affliction means you've got a problem. It's like an illness or a problem. You're afflicted. You've got these problems. Well, what kind of problem is this affliction? These afflictions Buddha's talking about are mental afflictions. Mental afflictions. Not physical, like knee aches and, headaches. An affliction is a problem. Could also be, Jabari leaving me. I've got an affliction, So here we're talking mental afflictions. Well, what's a better phrase in our modern daily language? And it sounds a bit shocking, you'll hear. They're mental illnesses. So I think Buddha would like that phrase. It's a very accurate phrase, very accurate translation of this word klesha. So what are these mental illnesses he says that we've all got? Well, there's thousands of them. There's thousands. 84,000 Buddha has established. But he luckily narrows it down to 3. And therefore he calls them the 3 poisons. Well, another nice phrase, the 3 toxic emotions. Very tasty phrase, 3 toxic emotions. And on the face of it, these sound so cute, sort of so simple. If we think about modern psychology and modern psychiatry and the volumes daily added, of new mental illnesses, new complex problems, these words sound absurdly simple, But this is the crucial point in the Buddhist view, when we're describing very specific, precise, specific states of mind. And the job we need to do in this unpacking and unraveling process as we progress is to be able to hear them very precisely. So right now, we know there's just this kind of soup of emotion in there. We don't really give many names and labels to the feelings and the emotions. We mainly, and this is one of our biggest problems, we mainly focus on the external problem. Whether it's happiness as well. Tell me about your happiness, Robina. And I will give a detailed description of Jabari, the object. No, I said about your happiness, Robina. Oh, I just did. No, you didn't. You described the object of your happiness. The person. Why are you angry, Robina? And I'll give you a detailed description of Jabari when he cheated on me, or whatever. So we equate, we conflate feelings with the external thing that seems to trigger it. And we're addicted to that. We can't even, so what do you mean describe my anger? I described what Jabari did to me. We believe that, and so this is really throws us, and that's how we think in our psychology. So we want the first time, so I'll go to my therapist and we'll go back into the past. And we'll unpack and unravel my past. What did mummy do? What did daddy do? What did the Catholic nuns do? What did my ex-boyfriends do? We're trying to establish, and we're mainly trying to find that needle in a haystack. Ah, that's when the anger began. That's when the depression began. We're looking out there, quite literally. So the Buddha says, not problem, but the better way to put it for the Buddha, that all those external events are merely a catalyst for my anger, a catalyst for my happiness. This is a crucial point. And this is really puzzling to us, because as soon as we see a person crazy, we immediately try to think, well, what happened to him? Oh, his mother beat him. Oh, now we understand. Well, you understand the condition that triggered something in his mind called anger. So the Buddha's approach is, we have to become familiar with the mind itself. The anger itself, the compassion itself, the attachment itself. And that's a cognitive story deep in our bones that we only see the physical expression of because we don't notice what happens in our mind until it vomits out the mouth, or if you get depressed, until you can't get out of bed one morning because you're inert with depression. So this is the major obstacle to our wanting to look into our mind. Is first because we believe the outside world is the cause, and we use all our brilliant analysis, brilliant scientific capacity for analysis to analyse the outside world. But for the Buddha, we're missing the main thing, the actual cognitive process itself. And that's the expertise of these amazing Indians. The job from the Hindus and then the Buddha, and this is the job, is a totally internal job. They mapped the mind. So, there's a sophisticated map of the mind, not the brain, the cognitive process itself. But everything is conspiring against us doing that. I believe he's the problem. I believe he's the cause of my happiness. I believe what mummy did and daddy did. I believe my genes, my DNA, the physical. We're looking at everything for the Buddha, but the real one, the real cause, the actual cognitive process itself, my own mind itself, the thoughts themselves that inform my behaviour and inform my emotion. So it's not an easy job. It's not an easy job, is it? So the first category, excuse me, the neurotic, ridiculous, the mental illnesses, like I said, he has 84,000 of them, narrows it down to 3. They're all subsumed to this 3, and they're all very logically connected. So what are these 3? If we can begin to understand these 3, and they're quite multifaceted, we'd really have an insight into the way Buddha thinks, the way Buddha's describing the process we have to do. So there's 3, and they've got an intimate relationship, like a hierarchical relationship. The root mental illness, if you like, the root affliction, the root neurosis, the root nonsense state of mind, is simply called ignorance, and it's very specific, and that ends up, all the Buddhist teachings in this way we're describing will end up under, the wisdom teachings all come down to this whole way of how things exist finally, relating to what they call emptiness, and we'll go into all that hopefully if we have time. The root delusion, another term that's used is delusion, and I'll go into this. There's no really good equivalent in Romanian. We'll go into that. Root delusion, the root affliction, the root mental illness, and it's primordially deep. So basically this is the deepest primordial misconception deep in our bones from ancient countless lives of practicing it, that's so instinctive, like I'm saying, that we don't even have a name for it in modern science or modern psychology. It's this primordial wrong sense of self. This paralysed, concrete, separate, lonely, bereft, panic-stricken, fear-based sense of self. It's mostly like a sleeping lion, but then arises fearfully sometimes. But this is the deepest assumption of the very nature of myself. The Buddha would say is completely a misconception, but so primordially deep. It gives rise to then effectively the main cause of our day-to-day suffering for the Buddha, and that's described, in the teachings, in the Four Noble Truths, for example, which we'll go into, where Buddha describes what is happiness, what are the causes, can get rid of it, and what are the solutions. So we're implying that here. So this deep instinctive ego, they call it colloquially, this ignorance, they call it colloquially ego grasping. this primordial grasping, instinctive, automatic, instinctive. In fact, even what maybe Mr. Darwin came up with, I think, is this concept of instinct for survival. When you're attacked or offended, this fear rises up, you know. I think that's a good term that Buddha might like for this ego grasping. It's this colloquial phrase. This primordial sense of an I that rises in a state of absolute panic. It's like a sleeping lion most of the time, and it's rooted deep inside us. So on the basis of that sense of a separate, lonely, frantic, concrete, solid I, it gives rise to this main one, effectively the main source of our pain and suffering in daily life. And it sounds ridiculous because the word is so simple. It's the word attachment. And this is multifaceted. It's not the way we use the word at all. We use it as an equivalent of being close to somebody. Or she's got very attached to her family. That's like she's close to her family. She loves her family. Nothing wrong. But this is a different definition. And we all know words have different definitions. You've got to really realize this word that Buddha's using is not the way we think the word is. I mean, we know words have different definitions, you know. Like, you know, when I lived in London, I used to live in a flat. Now I think we're all Americanized. We live in apartments. I don't know about in Romania. We lived in flats in London. And I lived in flats in Australia. So, you know, I've only heard of a flat that you live in, and then someone tells me that that's a flat table, I'll go, oh, I've got to live there. No, we know it's a different definition. Very obvious. We know that. You learn music, you play something in B flat. Same words, same pronunciation, different definition. So here it's crucial to know the word that Buddha uses for attachment, the word attachment, is not the attachment we're talking about. It's another definition. This is the source of our suffering and pain. It's a deeply neurotic, absurd, multifaceted mental illness, without a doubt, as far as the Buddha is concerned. And as I describe it, you'll recognize it, you'll give other names to it. So it's multifaceted. And this is the main expression of the root affliction, this attachment. So basically we're born with it. We come into this life with the Buddha, programmed with all our personality traits, our instincts, our habits, the works, coming not from the past of mummy, daddy, grandma, grandpa, and the monkeys, but coming from our own past. This is the crucial point to establish here. As a hypothesis, sure, you mightn't like it, but that's what we're discussing. The mind goes back and back, and we become programmed into this life with our own tendencies, our own habits, our own personality traits. And that's where the karma business comes in, and we'll go into this. So, okay, the key one, the key painful state of mind that runs our daily lives is there underneath, running our daily lives. It's too so instinctive. So it's, like I said, multifaceted. Well, the deepest, most energetic level of this attachment, a consequence of having practiced attachment, is we wake up in this life, and depending on the person, it can be much stronger or less. Its main energy is this one of dissatisfaction. This unbelievable assumption that I am not enough. I don't have enough. Whatever I get, not enough. However much Jabari tells me he loves me, not enough. How much food I eat, not enough. How often I change my body, not enough. How often I fix my hair, never enough. It's the default assumption of attachment that I am not enough. And this is the most tragic one. This is something we really do believe in. We understand it, we can see it. Never satisfied, never satisfied, never satisfied. That's the deepest, subtlest, energetic level. So naturally, because there's a feeling and an assumption I'm not enough, I don't have enough, then naturally the next level of it is this hunger, this kind of emotional hunger, and that you're looking out there, naturally out there, to find something such that when I have contact with it, it will bring satisfaction. That's the real job of attachment. And that's the belief we live in, that the outside world is that when I get it, I'll get happy. So what we really want is the happy feelings. Attachment's job is this vampire in us, basically, to get the object so that we have contact, so that pleasant feelings are triggered. So this deep dissatisfaction, which gives rise to this constant searching, yearning, craving, and it's always there to one degree or another, very quietly. It doesn't always have to be gross, you know. It's always just there. And then the next level of attachment, and this is pervading it, and this is its conceptual level, this is its real job, it exaggerates the deliciousness of the object. So I'm looking for the boy, some of us are looking for the money, for the body, for this. I mean, attachment is limitless in its capacity to find something to glom onto, to believe that when I get that, I'll get happy. And don't hear this as moralistic. Don't hear it as, you know, punitive. No, we're trying to understand psychologically how our mind works. So in my case, it might be the body, the person, the boy. So my attachment grabs hold of this one. And then what attachment mainly does then is that it exaggerates his deliciousness. I'll hear about how he left his last 4 girlfriends and cheated on them. I won't care, because he likes me, he's kind to me. I don't care. He looks divine to me. As far as I'm concerned, I see him as divine. So attachment over-exaggerates the object's deliciousness. And that could be the chocolate cake. It could be anything. And that's what keeps us sustained and determined to get the object. Because it looks so delicious, it happens to have the function of triggering very delicious feelings, and we'll go into this, technically. So of course, you want good feelings. He seems to generate them. I'm going to keep hold of him, babe. So this next level of attachment is like a vampire to possess him. You know? Mine. Look at mummies and children. Mummies literally believe they made that baby, and they've got a literally some extension. It's like another limb. We know this. We do. This is what attachment does, you know. Your possessions. This is what attachment does. We're dissatisfied, emotional hunger, craving to get it, exaggerate his deliciousness, exaggerate his role in making me happy, so that it becomes this massive control freak. Expectations. So I get him, and then attachment believes that he must do what my attachment wants, which is to do what I want every second. So the rough, kind of raw, kind of heavy way of describing attachment is there's this junkie in us, this vampire in us, that is frantic to get only the nice things. It can only bear the nice things. Attachment is a junkie for the nice things. Nice smell, nice taste, nice this, nice word, nice that. In other words, another way to say it is attachment is this junkie that only wants the nice things, which means only wants what I want. Only wants something that's in sync with my opinions. And of course, we believe this story implicitly. This for the Buddha, Lama Yeshe said one time, I can tell you about attachment for 1 whole year. And we can do this happily for the rest of the weekend. Won't get bored. But we will never begin to understand it until we look deeply inside, because we have to recognize it, you know. And it's layers and layers and layers and layers. So to be at a point in your own practice where you've gone beyond attachment, that's pretty advanced. That's pretty stunning. That's pretty remarkable. But it's so profoundly natural for us that even hearing these words, we recognize every one of these aspects. But we can't conceive of not having it. That's why we consider it normal. In our psychology, in our science, we give it equal status as a valid part of a valid person. Of course, as long as it's not completely out of control, but some level of it is so normal for us to question it seems kind of weird, you know. But this is what Buddha's doing. And he says we can get rid of it. And why should we? Because it causes us suffering. So that's not easy to see. So now, what's the third one of these 3 toxic emotions? This one is more evident, and we can see it's a problem sometimes. This was called aversion. So there's ignorance, or ego grasping, attachment to get what the fantasy I wants, and then a panic attack when it doesn't. So when attachment doesn't get what it wants, which is 1,000 times a day, then you have the panic attack of aversion. Oh my God, that's no good. So, you know, attachment's like, oh, that's delicious, and you go towards it. Aversion is, oh, no, that's ugly, and go away from it. And that's happening at the subtlest level or the most intense level. So the obvious, and again, anger is this aversion is multifaceted. So the obvious volatile level of aversion is called anger. You see me shouting and yelling. Oh, Robina's angry. So anger is the response when attachment doesn't get what it wants. And attachment is the default mode in daily life, and it's the assumption that I must get what I want. I must get only the nice things, according to my opinions. So when I don't get what I want, and it's not being mean. This is happening 1,000 times a day. You know? This is happening every second, actually. But our tragedy is, our trouble is, we only notice it when it's really volatile, like the anger. But there are milder versions of this aversion that are happening 1,000 times a day. You know, when Jabari doesn't put the toilet seat down, when he doesn't answer me perfectly the first time, when the person in the bus looks at me ugly, when the sound is too noisy. The tiniest things can happen throughout the day that your attachment gets upset, because it only wants nice things. It's very intolerant. So the millisecond it doesn't get what it wants, the aversion arises. So it can be volatile anger, or it can be irritation, annoyance, frustration, upset, anxious, stressed, all these words we use. These are the expression of thwarted attachment. When things go well, we all know we call that happiness. How'd you go today, Robina? I had a lovely day. What happened? Well, Jabari smiled at me, he gave me a cup of tea, the traffic was good, the lights were green, the boss was kind, the food was delicious. That's called a happy day. Why? Because attachment got what it wanted. What's an unhappy day? Exactly the opposite. My attachment didn't get what it wanted. It's not being mean. This is how we work. This is called, what Buddha calls samsara. That's this. Of course, we don't question this process because it's so instinctive, so automatic, so primordial, so natural. So, of course, okay, now, still anger. So there's a volatile level of anger, then there's irritation, annoyance, frustration, upset, and then even more subtle, depression, despair. That's completely internalized aversion. So patient people have that. Some of you people don't shout and yell. I mean, I think you're like saints, you know. That's profound. But what happens to you when your attachment doesn't get what it wants? Because you're like the rest of us. When the noise happens, the wrong thing, you read the ugly politician, your husband's mean to you, but you don't vomit out. You don't express your anger, which is marvellous, but it goes inside. You don't, you know, it goes in, and you just have aversion, but it builds up. Remember, nothing goes astray. Nothing goes astray. And when we don't deal, this is the point, when we just don't deal with all the dramas, we just build up the anger, build up the aversion, build up the stress, until you collapse one day. Or for me, I'll kill Jabari or you'll kill yourself. And this is the real problem that comes from all these assumptions we have. That first, the outside world is the main cause. Second, we don't go more deep into ourselves to notice this process. So therefore, we only notice what's happening in our mind, deeper down, when the body is involved. So for me, it's easy. You can see it when the words are shouting, spit is coming out the mouth, eyes are wide, fist flailing. Oh, she's angry. But I don't notice it until it comes out my mouth. But you won't notice it. You won't notice your anger, your aversion building up over years and years when your attachment didn't get what it wanted, because you don't shout. But you now one day can't get out of bed. You're inert with depression. So now you notice it because your body is noticing. And this is why we are so gross in our... We don't recognize what's happening in the mind until it becomes emotional. This is all the consequences of all these other assumptions. And that's just way too late. That's like, you know, you're driving on the road, like Anna was in Bucharest. I was so happy. I love driving fast. It's 170 kilometres an hour. I was so excited. You don't have road rules here? You like the Germans? You do have restrictions, but you don't seem to get caught, you know. In Australia, cameras get you everywhere. You can't even, you know, I've got thousands of dollars of fines. I gave up driving because I got too many speeding tickets. But so basically my analogy here, I got carried away there, is you're driving on the freeway at 170 kilometres an hour, and you go, oh, my wheels are falling off. Well, it's a bit late to notice, isn't it? I mean, really and truly, because people say, that's the point. People, okay, you know very well that you have mechanics. You do not go, you don't ever, everybody takes care of their car, even if you're poor. You make sure the wheels are okay, you make sure the bolts are on tight, you make sure there's petrol in the thing, you make sure, you know, you do not wait till the wheels fall off. You know, this is catastrophic. Well, we do that with our emotions. We don't even notice what's going on in our mind. And that's the Buddha's real point. We do not notice the millions of thoughts every day. There's not a millisecond we're not having 1,000 thoughts. In the Western psychology even, we say there's 1,000 thoughts a day. A second, Buddha agrees. And we don't pay attention until they're vomiting out the mouth of rage, and I want to kill somebody, or you can't get out of bed, and after 60 years of being depressed, you've only finally noticed. I mean, that's really tragic. And that's because we pay attention to the outside, we don't give power to the mind, we obsess with the outside, and we're obsessed with the body. Are we communicating here? So we've got to start noticing what the hell's going on in here before the wheels fall off. And if we can do this, forget about getting single point of concentration, being this ingenious, amazing person. Forget about getting rid of attachment long term. Forget about the really advanced levels of this stuff. You know, you can get there. But even reasonable practice every day, reasonable wish to see your damn mind every day, working with it slowly, 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 takes time. Unpacking and unraveling. Lessening attachment, lessening aversion. You become more steady, more reasonable, more adult, more stable, more sane, more happy. Takes time, but this is the job, you know. And we are the beneficiary. You must first focus on that. Don't get all moralistic. Oh, that sounds like selfish. Yeah, but how intelligent. Like, you know, knowing that everything you think and do and say brings consequences first to you. First to you. That's the bottom line. Maybe it's time for a tea break. Tea break. And I'll have some questions after that, okay? Yes? 11:30, 12. Do you have a 20 minutes something by the time you all have a cup of tea? I don't know. And if you want to chat, whatever, talk about this stuff, it's very helpful. So have about, I'll just sort of, what'll I do? Where shall I sit?
You can go upstairs then.
Okay, so please enjoy your tea. You get the lunch if I can.